With the recent success of the reboot and revival of X-Men 97, I myself and many other comic book and Marvel fans are wondering what show from the early 2000s or maybe the late 90s is going to get rebooted next. And of course, if I had to pick, I would be championing for Spider-Man the Animated Series. Or as like what I've seen online, everyone's saying if it got revived, it would be called Spider-Man 98. So in this video, I'm going to go over my pitch and what I would do if I was in charge of rebooting and reviving the animated series and making Spider-Man 98. Firstly, I want to look at why would we even reboot or revive this series to begin with. The show had almost a flawless and perfect ending. It went with Secret Wars and the Spider-Verse going on. So what would we actually have to explore with this specific Spider-Man? He already did Secret Wars and Spider-Verse, and if we look back over the course of the show, he fought almost every single rogue gallery villain there is for Spider-Man, even the Big Wheel. So if we were to revive this version of Spider-Man, we would have to be very specific with the choices that we made. Firstly, I want to look at why did X-Men 97 get a reboot? Well, I don't want to look at the behind-the-scenes drama and everything that happened with like the actual show back in the 90s. I want to look at present day. So the reason that I believe X-Men 97 specifically got its reboot, because one, it's going to be fan service to the older audience who's actually fans of the X-Men. Two, Marvel's about to introduce in the upcoming future the new X-Men for their MCU. And I think blending this in an animation format is perfect because we get a glimpse of what like these legacy characters actually are. That way the old audience gets to win by seeing their favorite comic book TV show come back to life and be revived, as well as the new generation gets to experience these legacy characters for what they were and the new generation of stories that are to come. That way when Marvel and the MCU specifically introduces the new X-Men in live action, we will have the audience that's already kind of familiar with what's going on. Whereas Spider-Man, everyone knows who Spider-Man is, so I think the argument of, oh, we have to reboot the animated series to get everyone prepped up for Spider-Man, no. That's not going to work. I mean, we have Miles Morales, who people say is like Spider-Man's sidekick or like his predecessor. He's already about to get his own trilogy. So everyone, even your grandma, knows who Spider-Man is. So let's take that out of the conversation. There's no reason we need to reboot the animated series to actually have anything to do with present-day Spider-Man or Marvel. Before we get into that, please consider subscribing. At the moment, only 96% of you guys are actually subscribed to the channel that watch the videos. It just helps me know that you guys like the videos that I'm making and want me to keep making more, and I'll keep making more because of it. So please consider subscribing if you haven't already. But enough of that, let's get into my pitch for Spider-Man 98. In this video, I'm going to go over the 5 questions that I have on what would justify making a Spider-Man 98 series. Starting with, why do we need a Spider-Man reboot for the animated series? Is there even a want or a need for a revival of this show, because this show ended in what I would honestly think is like a perfect ending for the character? Thirdly, what would the plot be? What would justify the revival of this series? And what would it look like moving forward that is different than the other Spider-Man adaptations that we already have? So I have a video explaining and reviewing all of the animated series, so you can watch that if you want, but I'll give you the Cliff Note version right now of what happened at the end of the series. After the events of Spider-Verse, Madam Web told Peter Parker it's finally time for him to get his happy ending, and he's going to go chasing through the multiverse to find his MJ. Now, what specifically happened to his MJ was during a battle with the Green Goblin earlier on in the series, MJ falls off the Brooklyn Bridge, and we think that she gets Gwen Stacy'd and she dies, but she actually gets fallen into this interdimensional portal that sucks her into a different multiverse or a different dimension or whatever, and we never see the original MJ ever again. Like I said earlier, if we're going to have this reboot, let's get into the reasons why I believe we could personally justify having a revival and reboot of this show. Right now, I want to talk about where we would pick up the story. I could see the show picking up in one of two ways. You could do what X-Men 97 did and pick up right where we left off. We pick up with Peter Parker, Spider-Man, and Madam Web diving in through the multiverse and trying to find exactly where MJ went in this different dimension, or we could flash forward a few years and just have Peter and MJ already in their pre-established life, and we pick up where we would have left off if Spider-Man just found MJ. We wouldn't have to go through the whole thing of diving through different dimensions, but honestly, I like the idea of Peter having to actually search for MJ, so we're going to stick with that. In the very first episode, I would have Peter going through different dimensions trying to find the correct MJ, and this could be fun. We could kind of have it be like Multiverse of Madness, where Spider-Man's going to different past cartoons. Since this is in the present day, we can kind of have an homage to like Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, or the 67 show, or Ultimate Spider-Man. You get the gist. But I do not want this to turn into a Spider-Verse story, so if we were going to do that, it would have to be very quick, very short, and kind of be an homage to exactly what we came from, but establish that this is not going to be a Spider-Verse multiverse story. And then, of course, after Peter finds MJ, his long-lost love, I think he should propose like on the spot to MJ, because they had plans to originally get married, and then all this stuff happened. So I think he proposes, and then we cut like a year or so in the future, or a month or whatever, and we see the actual wedding of Peter and MJ, because we saw that in the animated series, but sadly it was the clone of MJ that was like the Hydro Man Eve or whatever. So give this Peter Parker his actual wedding day with his real MJ. And then right after that, at the very end of episode 1 for season 1, we're going to flash forward like probably 15-ish years in the future where Peter Parker and MJ actually have a son that's about anywhere from like 10 to 13 years old, and they're already established, and Peter is now a more mature and adult Peter Parker and Spider-Man, and we're going to pick up the story right there in episode 2. So now that we loosely have laid out what the story would actually look like, let's get into why we could justify having this as a reboot. Firstly, having a Peter Parker that's going to be in his mid-40s I think is going to be perfect because it's going to resonate really, really close with the old 90s audience, because that's how old the audience is now. So having the audience be able to put their shoes directly into this version of Peter Parker is something that I think is done very differently. And I'll talk about this later on, but this is going to be a little bit of an homage to the current Ultimate Spider-Man run where Peter Parker's older, but instead of him getting his powers as he's older, he's just going to be maturing and growing with his powers, very similar to Logan, but he's not going to be that old yet. I think it'd be very interesting if this version of Spider-Man is slowly on the decline. Like, he's not winning every fight, he's not winning as much as he used to as a younger Spider-Man, so anywhere from like 60 to 40% or like 70 to 30% Spider-Man's winning, but when he loses hard. So having a more grounded Peter Parker in the story that's older, rough around the edges, kind of is an adult, is a father, I think is a very interesting and unique storytelling decision that with Spider-Man specifically, we don't see a lot of adaptations of. So I think this would be the perfect way to do it, especially in an animated format with the character that we're already used to and that we already love. Like I said, let's give this version of Peter Parker and MJ, let's give them a son anywhere from age 10 to 13 to 15. One thing I want to emphasize very early on is that this kid does not know that his dad is Spider-Man. Of course, he knows who Spider-Man is, but he doesn't know that his father is Spider-Man. So throughout the course of his life while he's growing up, and currently when he's like at a t-ball game or a High School Musical or maybe going to prom when he's older, you get the gist. Spider-Man, Peter Parker, he is constantly being flaky with his son, and he's not giving his son like deadbeat dad vibes, but very close to that. His son is constantly wondering why my dad never cares me, why my dad never loves me, and then we can incorporate MJ into this story where she's having to lie to her son all the time and be like, oh, it's a work trip, blah, 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 and he's eventually going to get fed up, but they're doing this to protect their son and protect their family, because if you tell a 10-year-old kid, hey, your dad's a superhero, he's going to tell people, word's going to get around, and then Spider-Man's enemies are going to know where to hurt him and where to attack him most. So let's keep this story grounded where his kid does not know that his dad is actually Spider-Man. He's just like, why is my dad never around? And it's a very like kind of sad and like grounded story. So like I said, staying with this mature and emotional tone, let's have this version of Spider-Man, even though it is the Peter Parker from the animated series, now that he's grown up though, I want this to kind of be like the Peter Parker and Spider-Man dynamic to be almost akin to like a basketball player or some professional athlete that as he's gotten older, he's slowly losing love for the game because he's not able to perform as well as he once was. But in this case, Peter Parker knows that he has to be Spider-Man because with great power comes great responsibility, and he knows he has to keep doing what he's doing, but the wear and tear on his body as he's getting older, he's slowly falling out of love with it, but he knows in this like universe, he's the only one that is going to be able to defend New York. So Peter and MJ, of course, they're older and they're adults. They're not having to worry about money trouble. So instead, the emotional heartstring pull of having Peter Parker want to get the girl instead of being Spider-Man, or he can't work at his job because he has to be Spider-Man. In this, it's him and his son. He can't spend time with his son because he has to be Spider-Man. That on top of Peter slowly losing the love that he once had for being Spider-Man, he's falling out of love with this because the wear and tear it's taking on his body. He's kind of has a bitter mindset at the beginning of the series where he's like, I have done everything I can. I've been Spider-Man for 20, 30 years or however long we want to put this at. I've been Spider-Man for this long. Like, someone else, please take this role. Like, take this cup from me. But there's no one there to take the role for him. So he has to keep doing that, but at what cost? He's not able to spend time with MJ, who he traveled dimensions to go find. And now he's not able to spend time with his long-lost love that he finally found or their new son. He's constantly having to go back and forth being Spider-Man, and with the rise of new villains and everything, he's honestly questioning where he sits at in the middle of this story. Like, should I just give up being Spider-Man so I can be with my family? Like, do I not deserve to have a happy ending? So that's where I want to put this Spider-Man in the middle of season 1. Again, how can we justify having this series be rebooted? Well, we can give Peter Parker the happily ever after ending that he deserves, but we can have a more grounded and realistic take on that even when you get the thing you think you want in life, not everything is perfect. So obviously he's still going to have trouble moving forward. There's going to be new villains, which I'll get to in a second. He's going to have problems taking care of his family and being Spider-Man. So being able to revive this character that everyone thought, oh, Peter's just going to go find his love and they're going to live happily ever after like a little fairy tale. let's put that in like not our universe, but let's put that in a reality, in a real life situation where, yeah, he got married. That's awesome. Life's not going to be perfect now. He's still going to have problems moving forward. So I briefly touched upon the villains in the show, and that was honestly one of the biggest things that I was wondering with when trying to come up with this idea for this pitch on what I would do with this series regarding the villains. Because like I said, Spider-Man, all of the rogues gallery has basically already been explored. So if you're going to reboot or revive this series, what are we going to do about the villains? And so I've come up with 4 examples of what I think would be the best way to approach the whole villains in this show. Because you can't have a Spider-Man series without villains, right? Number 1, we can just have all of the villains come back and have it be like a Spider-Verse like dimension thing. Like, oh, like essentially like time travel. Like, oh, you went to a dimension, but when you came back, things changed. So now you have Doc Ock, Green Goblin, Sinister Six, all those people come back. And they could make that work. I could see how that would work, but I'm not a huge fan of that. So let's move to number 2. So number 2, of course, it's like Spider-Man in the 90s with all the censorship and stuff. Like, he wasn't even allowed to punch people. So in this show, all of his villains, they didn't die back in the old original series. So we could have them come back and be like an older villain around Peter Parker's age or even older. So he could still fight some of those villains. But I think in option number 2, we lean very heavily on having predecessors for these villains. So take like the Vulture from Homecoming, for example. Like, he's just a guy in a suit, so we could have a lot of guys in suits for Peter to fight. But again, I don't really love the idea of having all of his villains in this series just be like the 2.0 version or like the predecessors of his original villains. Thirdly, we can just make up a whole lot of original villains. And I know in my review for Spider-Man the New Animated Series, I said I hated how much there was only like original villains. And I agree, I don't like this idea, but I had to throw it out there because I knew someone would say it. So let's go to what I believe is the best option, which is option number 4 on how to handle the villains. Honestly, I think option 4 is the best option, and that's simply just to combine everything I just said. Or we can have original characters come in and original villains. Like, that's no problem, as long as they're written with love and respect that this show and this series and revival deserves. I have no problem introducing brand new villains, as long as they are formulated correctly. We can also have the predecessors come in. So there's nothing wrong with having like a Prowler that's not actually Uncle Aaron or whatever. Like, we can have different versions of these same beloved villains. Like, we could have a Doc Ock who has the arms and the tentacles but isn't Otto Octavius. I know that's like the core part, but in Spider-Verse it was like the lady Doc Ock, and so we can do that as well with the original villains. But most importantly, let's bring original villains back. We can give some gimmicky comic book excuse like Electro. Oh my gosh, he was stuck in the power grid for so long, but when Spider-Man came back, he felt his presence and knew it was time to reemerge. So like, there's the Electro from the old series. Or, oh my gosh, we actually didn't defeat Sandman, or we broke out of the raft. Like, we can find ways to bring back these villains. So I think having a mix of all the old, not all, but having some of the old villains, having new villains, and then having new predecessors, which when this happens, they have to be like in their 20s or early 30s, like significantly younger guys that are going to be like flying circles around this like older Peter Parker. So having a mix of all of those villains, I think, would be a really nice mixed bag compared to what we normally get in Spider-Man adaptations, where it's like, okay, well, time for a new Spider-Man show. Let's introduce Norman Osborn, who's definitely not going to be the Green Goblin. Let's introduce Doc Ock. Let's introduce Electro. All these characters. This is kind of a mixed bag of like the old villains, new villains, and the predecessors, which honestly, I think this was the hardest thing I had to tackle when coming up with my pitch for this, but I like it. Lastly, if we're going to have a revival and reboot for this beloved series, let's not just do 1 season. Let's do like a bare minimum 3 seasons. So I'm briefly going to touch on, like, again, if I was in charge of the revival and reboot of this series, what each season would look like. I already went through season 1 where he interdimensional hops, finds MJ, and then goes back to present day, marries her, has a son, and then over the course of season 1, he's just fighting the different categories of villains that I just said. But at the end of season 1, let's have Peter's son find out that his dad is actually Spider-Man. So like the season finale for season 1, Peter's coming in late at night where he thinks that his son's asleep because he has a bedtime, and he comes in after like a really bloody battle, and he comes in with his suit all messed up and everything, and he comes into the house, and there's no hiding this from his son. His son sees what's going on, he's aware, the gears are turning, everything clicks. Very similar to the Aunt May Homecoming reveal where Peter turns around and she's like, what the? And then it cuts. We could have something like that. Again, I don't really care how the reveal happens, but I think it would be very interesting for like the whole part of season 1 to have Peter gaslight his son and have his son, because he's not stupid. Like MJ and Peter, MJ's a reporter, Peter's a very intellectual person. Like their son is obviously not going to be stupid. So having Peter's son be gaslit by both his parents the entirety of season 1 only only for at the end of season 1 for Peter to reveal himself as Spider-Man, I think that's awesome. And then season 2 can pick up right where season 1 left off, and we can have a very more mature storytelling of Superman and Lois from the CW, except we can have actual like adult themes in this show, where in the example from Superman and Lois, Clark Kent is like teaching his sons with the powers on how to like harness their abilities and all this stuff, and like don't use them when you fight the bullies at school because you'll kill them. We can kind of have that same vibe with Peter and his son at the beginning of season 2, because his son's just about to be entering into puberty, and that's when these powers are going to start to emerge from his son. So then Peter realizes, okay, my son's going to have these abilities that I have. I don't want him in the crime fighting world. I want him to stay away from that, but he needs to know how to master his abilities so he doesn't accidentally create disasters. So the first half of season 2, we can have Peter doing the standard Spider-Man plot stuff, and then on like the B plot, we can have him and his son kind of bonding, finally rekindling that relationship that his son might have had, where like his dad wasn't there for him in the beginning of his life, but now he kind of realizes it, but still holds resentment for his father, as well as being trained in the ways of being like a mini Spider-Man 2.0. And then in the season finale for season 2, I would have Peter tell his son and tell MJ like, hey, I gotta go fight this guy. Have it be like a lesser villain that he's dealt with 1,000 times in the show, like Backshot the Leaper or something. And he goes and leaves, and then they see on the news that it was actually a trap, and his dad is being like beaten. And it looks like that scene from Spider-Man 3 on the news where like, this might be the end of our Spider-Man. Only for Spider-Man 2.0, or like Little Spider, or whatever name we want to give him, for him to like leap out the window in like a Homecoming-esque like pajama suit and save his dad. He obviously doesn't defeat the villains, but he gives his dad enough time to escape for both of them to team up, and then the two of them take on, let's not have it be like the Sinister Six, because that's always done in media like this, but have a group of villains. Let's have Spider-Man and his son, like Spidey 2.0, take on these groups of heroes and learn the training that his dad gave him. Very close to Into the Spider-Verse with Peter B. Parker and Miles Morales, where the training later on pays off. I think this would be an awesome way to pay off all the training that we had in the beginning of season 2, and also show that Peter's son is there for Peter despite of the hardships that they might have had early on in his childhood. And then season 3 can kind of just follow that natural progression of Peter kind of giving the ropes to his son, like he's learning and teaching him as much as he can, but at some point this version of Spider-Man is going to have to hang up the cape, hang up the mask and all that. That's not going to happen in season 3. We could have that happen in like the very last season of the show, and then even like make a new series called like Spider 2.0, whatever name we want to give this like mini Spider-Man guy. We can have that be like the sequel to the sequel, but in season 3, let's just have the two of them be working together through the entirety of the show. So the character writing and development for this son of Spider-Man, who's going to be set around like 13 to 15 years old in this series, and especially as this series progresses, let's have the writing and character development for him be phenomenal. Let's have it be outstanding. That way when Peter does decide to give up the mask and, you know, retire as Spider-Man, he has his son in this universe that's going to be there to follow in his footsteps. Now, I know what you're thinking. Yeah, this is taking just a lot of inspiration from other Spider-Man media, very heavily on the new Ultimate Spider-Man series coming from the comics, but I don't care. A lot of comics, and especially a lot of media in general, they take inspiration from other forms of media, whether it be books, television, movies, whatever you want to say. They all take inspiration from each other and formulate that into what they believe is the best narrative story. And this is what I would do if I was in charge of Spider-Man 98. The most important thing, though, if this is going to be done and done correctly, it has to be done by people that have love and respect for the original series. If we're going to choose to reboot this series, even if it's just going to be for one season, even though I would love to have at least 3 seasons and then have season 4 and 5 be something else, or just whatever. What I'm saying is, if we're going to reboot this series, it has to be done with love and respect for the original source material. We're not going to reboot the series, and we're not going to destroy everything that was in the multiple seasons beforehand. This has to be done with love for the original source material and characters, and if we're able to bring back the original voice actors, that would be awesome. The original writing team and directors and all that, that would be awesome as well. But if not, let's just make sure that whoever's at the helm for the studio for this has the same love that the X-Men 97 crew obviously has for that show as well. That's all I really have for now. Let me know what you guys think about this. I love brainstorming and coming up with these like what if scenarios. I'm a huge fan of the animated series, so if this were to get a revival, I would be ecstatic, but this is personally what I would do if I was in charge of the new Spider-Man 98 series or whatever we want to call it. But I know this isn't a perfect idea. I want to hear from you guys. What do you think of this idea? If you were in charge and was going to make your own pitch video like like this? What would you do differently? That's really all I have for now. Thank you guys so much for watching these videos and supporting the channel. The support recently has been amazing. You guys killed it on the Spider-Man His Amazing Friends video that I made. My next video after this is going to be a review of the 67 series. I just wanted a break between watching Spider-Man TV shows. I only got 2 left in the series, but I figured this would just be a fun video to make in the meantime. Please consider subscribing. It just helps the channel grow, helps me know that you guys like the videos that I make and want me to keep making videos like this. Like always, let me know what type of videos you guys would like me to make in the future. That's really all I have for now. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you guys so much for continuing to support the channel. The feedback and engagement is awesome. I love hearing from you guys, but that's really all I have. So take care. Bye.